Anado Mclauchlin is an assemblage and mosaic artist and founder and curator of the Chapel of Jimmy Ray Gallery and the Casa de las Ranas compound, about a half hour outside of San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. Anado, who was originally named James Rayburn Mclauchlin III, became a Mexico resident by way of Oklahoma, New York, India, and California. Anado has been creating art since early childhood and remains committed to tapping into that childlike innocence and sense of playfulness. His vision has been to create a visceral playground for both adults and children. He says, "I am not trying to change the world. I am using my art as a vehicle of exploration and inclusion in this big old world." I am pleased to welcome Anado to Best Cultural Destinations People Art Culture podcast. Anado, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm delighted to have you here on the People Art Culture podcast. And I want to dive in and start by asking a universal question, which is, how do you define culture?
Oh, that's very important. Culture to me is like the byproduct and the essence of sentient beings living amongst one another. It's always a mystery what comes up. There's the culture of yogurt, there's a culture of ants, there's a culture of humanity. But if you're speaking about human culture, it's, to me, it's always defined in different geographical locations and states of mind. So it's a byproduct of people living with one another.
I would agree. And yeah. Why does it matter?
Culture?
Yes.
It matters because it's a thread, threads that move entwine with one another and create a tapestry of living. It's what it is. It's what this whole existence is about. I believe the human culture is just an amazing event that I'm very proud to be part of. I'm sure you are too.
I am. So you are originally from Oklahoma. Can you tell us, how did growing up there influence who you are today? Did it play a role in the person you've become and the creator you've become?
Certainly did. I believe I spent maybe 40 years of my life running away from Oklahoma and not being very proud to have been from the middle of nowhere, but in a sense, the middle of nowhere is a very Zen statement. To me, I guess I was in my 20s when I realized the physical beauty of living on the prairie, but the cultural experience was just too much for me. I just felt like I was a frog in a shark pond. It's full of very, to me, conservative ideologues, and I could not thrive there, so I left. But I think in my response to leaving, I never ever forgot that I was an Oklahoman. It's just something that's in the air. It's a way of being. It's just almost like being the byproduct of being born in a log cabin. It's different. It's different than New York.
Right,
different than Boston.
Now, the installation that you have on your compound is just incredible, and there's so many different dimensions to it, and it's quite extensive. And one of the things that really struck me is that in different components of the installation, you pay homage to both your father and your mother. And I'm wondering if you can share what their respective legacies are to you, both as a person and an artist, and describe each of the pieces that pay tribute to them.
I can start with my father. My father, his given name was James Rayburn Mclauchlin Jr. He was a physician. His father's name was James Rayburn Mclauchlin Sr. He was also a physician. And the name that I was christened with is James Rayburn Mclauchlin III. it's quite a mouthful, and it's quite something to live up to in that legacy of doctors. I just never was attracted to being a physician in any way whatsoever, form. And I rebelled against it all of my youth. My father passed away when I was, I believe, 22 years old. He died in an airplane accident. And he never really ever got to know me as an adult. The last installment of myself that he saw was sort of a ne'er-do-well hippie kid. And I don't think he was that proud of me, even though there was some sort of a connection. The tragedy is that I believe my father never ever told me he loved me. It was just never happened. And it was something that I had to deal with for a long time. But I do know deep in my heart that we did have that connection of father-son. There's nothing more important for a man than the relationship with his father. And my father taught me everything about who I don't need to be, and by his legacy. And so I named on our property, our gallery, the Chapel of Jimmy Ray Gallery. It's my dad's name was James Rayburn, so that's where Jimmy Ray comes from. My sister, who is a very conservative woman, asked me, "Why would you do that?" And I said, "Because he was our father." And she said, "I still don't understand why you would do that." And I told her, "Because he gave me life." And that's why I named it that. I'm very grateful that I'm on this planet. I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for him. So that's my dad. As far as my mother is concerned, she is the reason I believe that I am an artist. She nurtured me in that respect. She knew I was somewhat of a outcast in my class situation in school. I had, I believe, some sort of learning disability. I couldn't sit still in class. I was kind of the class clown times 10. And she just told the teachers that if you can point them more towards art and poetry, I think you might have an easier time. And that's what happened. It was just exquisite. And my best memories of childhood were going through my mother's jewelry box and seeing all the beautiful bangles and tangled beads and pearls and the mystery of it all. And today I'm what you would consider an adornment artist. I adorn a lot. And I would say to Mother when I was a kid, "Mother, I'm bored." And she said, "Well, make something, honey." So that's basically what I've been doing, is I've been making things to keep from being bored. I'm very grateful to my mother, and I've dedicated, it's right now, it's about 110-meter long mosaic wall on our property, and it's dedicated to my mother, Marie Mclauchlin.
What fantastic advice. You know, go make something, and you know that she understood you enough to really point you in the right direction and give others who were in a position to teach you, you know, advice on where to lead you.
Very great.
That is quite a legacy. And you said something when I was on your property about your mother's tribute, about we are all part of the story. And I'd love to have you explain that.
Well, to me, ultimately, being that we're all part of the story is that we all have an origin in women. We are part of the essence of coming from women. And we share that in our existence, whether we're male, female, or trans, or fluid. And it's quite an amazing thing. And ironically, yesterday here in San Miguel, I was able to see the vagina monologues perform. And that just says it to me more. I may start crying because it meant so much to me. Women are, to me, are the essence. And I always like to pay homage to the essence.
And that's a gift. And that you have that bond with your mother. And when did she die?
She died in 1992, I believe, in Oklahoma. She had gone to an azalea festival, came home, drank a cup of coffee, went to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting the next day, and put the coffee cup in her sink with her. She always had her red lipstick. Went to the AA meeting, and her last words after introducing my cousin, who was the speaker that day, she said, "Oh, my heart." Those were her last words.
Wow. So she was a sober woman?
She was sober for 17 years. People say, "Wow, where did you get a mother like that?" And I said, it wasn't always like this. It was a whole, it was a mixed bag. But I believe that my mother had what one would call an awakening. The Zen people call it enlightenment. My mother was an awakened being. She had a religious experience, and to be around her as a sober woman was to be around a Buddha.
Wow.
Really, I mean that.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And she saw your success.
Well, I was the apple of her eye, so I guess I was always the success there. No matter what kind of trouble,
Oh, I love that.
no matter what kind of trouble I got myself into, she was very proud to have me. She knew me. She knew me deeply, and I told the story yesterday. I got on the plane after her funeral to fly back to California. I was sitting next to the window. I usually sit in the aisle seat, but that day I wanted to be at the window. And a man and his son got on the plane to sit next to me. And the little boy, cute little kid, said, "Can I sit next to the window?" And I said, "I'm sorry, no, you can't. I have to sit here." And we were flying back, and we were maybe over Utah or something. And I'm looking into the clouds. And whether you want to believe it or not, I had a visit from my mother. I told this story yesterday to friends, and she said, "I'm in a place where there's no judgment." And to me, that is such a profound statement, because I think we as humans live a life of judgment and denial and comparison and all these things that really don't help us in any way get further on in our involvement. And my mother has always been and will be my teacher and my guardian angel.
Well, Anado, the minute I said, she got to see your success, I thought to myself, why did I say that? Because, I think when you are a creative and you are artistic, or even if you're not, like, what does success really mean? As long as you're doing something that you feel has meaning and that you have those people that love you unconditionally. So I get what you're saying, and it wasn't a really great question.
Oh, no. I'm with you on that.
Now, you spent a decade in New York, and while there, you had a dream that inspired your life philosophy. Can you tell us about that and that period in your life?
Yes, I went to New York in the early 70s, like 71, and to be an artist. And, you have to make a living. So I saw a bunch of kids or young men in front of a hotel, and they were all taxi drivers. And of course, this was when everybody had long hair, and these guys had long hair, and you couldn't get a job if you had long hair anywhere else. So I thought, well, I could do that. So I became a taxi driver, and I did it for 10 years in New York City, in the bowels of New York, I like to describe it as. And it was quite a learning experience, and also a sort of a lonely existence, because you're in this vehicle by yourself, maybe with a few other people, 8 to 12 hours a day. And then you go home and you rest and you try and do some art, and then you're back in the taxi again. It was a trip, and it colored my life and it colored my creative process. So one night I was dreaming, or one day, because I did the night shift, I was lost in the dream, and I was driving my taxi. And I said out loud, "Where am I?" And the voice in the dream said, "You're on Kismet Street." And I did not know what he meant by Kismet Street. And I looked up, and there was a green New York street sign that you see. I don't know if they're still green or not anymore, but and it said Kismet on it. So the next day, I, of course, had to look up what Kismet meant in the dictionary, and it means fate. And pretty much that is the rule of the game, if there are rules in my creative process, is I'm just open to fate. I'm open to what existence has to offer. I think that if I'm open enough and get out of the way, lose the judgments, and just allow what's available in the hemisphere around me, then the creativity can happen. So it's all about fate. And I've named the 110-meter mosaic wall that's still in process, that'll be longer, Kismet Street.
I love that. And I find for myself that I'm my most happiest and doing what I feel is the most right for me when I can be that open, which unfortunately for me is not all the time, but that's great. Now, you have a self-portrait of you and your partner, Richard, that you call Mexican Gothic. And you've been with Richard for, is it 20 years now?
Yeah,
and
20 years.
Oh,
20
cool.
years.
And how does he play a role in your creative process?
Well, Richard and I met 1998, and he just, Richard has a background in art history. He taught art history on a high school level at a private school in the Bay Area for 20-some years, and he has a real foothold in contemporary and all forms of art, all the way back to the Paleolithic things. And so, and I, of course, am a plastic artist. I work in a three-dimensional world. And so I think it's not only the love affair that we have as two men, it's also the chemistry of both being interested in art, that we're able to challenge one another in our ideas and our foraging in the unknown. And Richard's the real anchor for me, just someone who I run things by all the time when I'm doing work. And he's also encouraged me to do other things than just mosaic work and assemblage, but to delve more into painting. And I just trust him. I trust his instincts. He's a bright man. He's a heartful man. And he is my favorite being.
Aw, well, I'm lucky that I have such a partner. And you know, it's funny because my husband can just say one word and it can open up a whole new world for me. And it's just,
Right.
it is really great when you have someone that believes in you and that does challenge you to try different things. And now, there's another dimension of your installation that I thought was so cool, and it's kind of at the beginning of going through your property, and it's an arch that you have several names for, all of which to me conveyed kind of a metaphysical vision. Can you describe the arch and your names for it and what they represent to you?
Well, the first arch is called the Arch to Nowhere. It's sort of a I guess it's a Zen statement. And it has a sister arch down below called, that's attached to the Chapel of Jimmy Ray, that's called the Arch to Now Here. So it's a play on words. It's from nowhere, meaning emptiness, to now here, meaning presence. And then I hope to have an arch on the other side that'll be completed within the year, called the Arch to Over There. And I'm dedicating the Arch to Over There to the friend and mentor and best friend who named Now Here and Nowhere. Her name was Pamela Nelson, and Pamela was my deepest ally in that spiritual realms. She knew me. She knew where to, just how to be with me. She encouraged me. We had such a good time together, and she had a conscious and timely death last July. And when I give these tours, I get to talk about her every time because I introduce the arches on the tour. And I conclude the little talk by saying that Pamela was the first swimsuit model on Sports Illustrated in 1953. I get to honor her every day.
Wow.
She's my friend.
That's awesome. And
Yeah.
Another feature in your work that's quite prominent are snakes. And I'm wondering if you can share what these represent for you.
Well, I've always just been intrigued by snakes. I remember as a child seeing a garter snake in the garden and just being blown away about their movement and their swiftness. And I was born and raised in Oklahoma, and there were rattlesnakes around. So these were also guardians of nature, and you just knew that you didn't go certain places. Nature needed to have some space there, and the snakes were there to protect her. And being from Oklahoma, which does mean in one native language, land of the red man, I learned a lot of Native American lore as a child, and to this day I collect Kachina dolls and Navajo rugs. And the native people told me that the snake is the animal closest to the ground. The snake listens and hears what the mother, the earth, has to say and reports back as a messenger. Ironically, in the Bible, I believe it's the Old Testament, the story of Adam and Eve, and they represent Lucifer as a snake. Again, the messenger, but in the terms of Christian and Judeo lore, the snake is got a bad rep, and I'm here to give the snake a better rep. That's my story. Yeah.
Isn't it fascinating how different traditions have different symbolism?
Right.
And what the interpretation can be. Another one of your mosaic installations is of two hands, and I'm wondering if you can describe that piece.
Right. The name of that piece, it's a large installation. It's called the Big Hands. It's really it was actually named by a friend of mine, Julie Ritchie, who's a mosaic artist who is a co-conspirator along with Ana Fortunato, excuse me, Ana. But they come every year and help us on one of our projects. And so the big hands represent the conflict and the separation that the United States and Mexico are experiencing, especially under the present administration in the United States of America.
And
so it's a metaphor.
Yes. And what's it saying?
It's saying that there is conflict and that the hands are moving away from one another. On each fingerprint, if it was to be anatomically correct, there is a skull, and that is representing decay and death. And they're facing away from one another. In the middle of those two hands is a circular form, a mandala. And in the center of the mandala is a glass anatomical heart that contains the ashes of a dear friend of mine who passed away way too young. And around that anatomical heart are 4 flowers representing aspects of her that I found to be quite profound. Her beauty, her quiet nature, her spontaneity, and her creativity. And to me, these are universal truths. These are something that are available in the ether for all of humanity. And if the United States and Mexico could pay more attention to those universal truths and less to racism and politics, there might be a chance of those hands coming together in a gesture of peace. It's just what I call installed poetry.
Right. Well put. Now, you have another piece called Coltrane that was created by your colleague Carlos's 5 sons. So I'm wondering if you can describe your relationship with Carlos and his family and the meaning behind this piece.
We bought our property almost 20 years ago, and I went into town to tell some newfound American friends who had been in San Miguel for many years that we found this property. And ironically, they had rented the house that we found years before. It had been abandoned for 10 years. And the local native population around here had created a road through part of our property where, which we actually owned where it was, and they would use that as a way of getting back and forth from up to down on this somewhat of a graded hillside. And my friends told me that there was a young man who lived above us in a house named Carlos, and he would be of assistance to us if we need any help. And one day, soon after we were living on the property, I saw this young man coming up the road, a man on a bicycle, looking very much like a young Mexican campo kid. Campo means country. And he was wear baseball hat, you know, shaggy hair, late 20s. And I asked him in my pigpen Spanish, "Do you know Carlos?" And he said, "I am Carlos." And that was just a magic moment. And I said, "Can you come work for me? Can you help me?" And he said, "Yes." And so the next day he came to work, and he's been working here ever since. He is my what I call my ayudante. He's my helper, but he's also my teacher and my friend. He's a major part of this whole process that we have here at Casa de las Ranas and the Chapel of Jimmy Ray. His thumbprint is in all of it with me and my other assistants, and with Richard's guidance too. Carlos and I have our own language. It's amazing. We have our own words. We are able to communicate in a different realm, and he knows my ideas, and we riff off one another. It's kind of like being in a band, like having the best lead guitar player to go along with my singing skills. And he could just do amazing things. He's a product of living here amongst animals and crops and their culture, and he's so handy. He has 5, they're now, I believe, 14 to 21 years old, but when they were ages 5 to 13, one day I had them go around the property and gather all of the dead wood on the ground from our mesquite trees. We live in a really beautiful situation where there's lots of mesquite trees. It's almost like we're in a forest. And so they brought the mesquite branches back to a certain cement slab that we had on the property. And we created this figure and made a face for him using log and different natural forms to create what we now call Coltrane. And Coltrane is the guardian spirit of our property. When I tell the story of Coltrane, automatically people think of John or Alice Coltrane, and they all kind of chuck. Coltrane is named after a road in Oklahoma where I grew up, Coltrane Road, Coatrain, Coltrane. And I always loved that name. And when we were building Coltrane, I had gone back to visit my family in Oklahoma City, and I was able to drive down Coltrane Road. So it was ripe in my mind. I had to name it that. And the irony also that it's John Coltrane.
Right. Well, I mistakenly immediately assumed it was John Coltrane. So it just goes to show you.
Well, it is in an etheric sense, but it was based in my Oklahoma heritage.
Right. Well,
and it actually looks like me too.
It's another example of interpretation always being personal. Another piece features the word always in Spanish. And I'm wondering if you could explain the significance behind that name and what it means to you.
The piece says siempre, it's of a mandala. We were approached by a group of young entrepreneurial people. I believe their name is Sandbox. They may have changed their name, but they're all under 30. And they go to a different location around the world every year for a retreat or a think tank. And one year they chose to come to San Miguel and do their retreat. And they contacted me and asked if they could have a 4-hour mosaic workshop out here. So I said yes, and we constructed a wall. Ironically, my father's portrait is on the other side, Jimmy Ray. We did that after this workshop. However, in preparing for the workshop, I created a mandala in the middle of this small wall that represents Sandbox's brand. And then above it wrote in child sort of psychedelic letters, siempre, which means always. I wrote that to remind them and myself that to always, always, always be in contact with that childlike scribbled nature of one's creative process, to not allow the adult, or to at least try and keep the adult editor out of the situation, and to create from a childlike experience of wonder. So it's about wonder. It's about staying in contact with
That's
wonder.
such an important message.
Yeah, to me too.
It's so easy to lose it. Now, you have what you referred to as the coolest composter in the world, and many of your pieces are made with recycled material. Can you tell us the story behind the composter and share your views on the relationship between art and used objects?
This composter that you're referring to is what's known as a baño seco here in Mexico, a dry toilet. We were approached by a group of green people in the green movement, to do a workshop on our property about building what we call a baño seco, or a composting toilet. And ironically, they never got back to me, and so I still had the idea of doing that. So I went online and researched how to build one, and of course did it in the style that I like to work in, and that is using recycled bottles, and I have recycled cookie jar lids on it. I have broken bottles, I have fine bottles, I have marbles, I have pieces of glass mirrors, and created what we now call the Casa Mahal. And I promise you, it's a jewel. There's two separate commodes. You use one side per year, and the other side is sealed, and the compost, you know, I'm putting my fingers up with, you know, parentheses or whatever. It cooks, the excrement cooks. I'm being very down to earth in my answer, I guess. But it's just a playful, amazing structure that we created. One of my major influences in my art, one of the people I really like to pay homage to, was a man by the name of Hundertwasser. Hundertwasser, you might want to look him up if you don't know him, was a artist in Austria who did just incredible work, just an amazing artist who spent his final years in New Zealand. And he has, in New Zealand, where he used to park his boat, he has created an incredible toilet there. And I like to say that we outdid Hunter with our Taka Mahal.
That's great. And can you just talk a little bit about your views on the relationship between art and used objects?
Well, to me, I work with what's available, and I like to combine and juxtapose articles or you know, trash in such a way that their sense of irony is tapped into. And I'm very highly influenced as a young man back in the 60s by the Combines by Robert Rauschenberg, and how he combined just the most unusual object to make the most brilliant pieces. So I just continue to do that. It's in Robert Rauschenberg's legacy that all of this is happening, I guess, because there's so much stuff that's thrown away that has such a beautiful either architectural or sacramental essence to it that needs to be returned to its proper alignment with other objects. I call it combining both the sacred and the profane, and that's a kind of a hackneyed term, but to me it means a lot.
Right, and that's life, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, of course.
Now,
that's what we do.
I learned that you are a self-taught ceramicist, and you know, the story that you shared about how you learned I felt made a great statement about the willingness to experiment and to be fearless in creating art. Can you share, literally how you learned how to do ceramics and your views about fear and art?
Well, to be quite honest, I'm not a ceramicist. I'm more of a mosaic ceramic pieces in my art. I don't create any of the ceramics myself. These are all pieces that I find or buy along the way. But I was working in my studio. I had a studio in Sausalito before we came to Mexico. And I was doing, again, these assemblages and combined pieces. As that's what I did. And I've been doing all, my adult life. And I decided I wanted to include a mosaic in it, and I had never done any mosaic work. And I called a friend of mine on the telephone who was a tile setter for bathrooms, and I asked him how he did it on the telephone. And then all of a sudden I went out and bought all the materials that I needed in order to make this mosaic piece, and just started doing it. I'm totally self-taught. In fact, I break all the rules of what the most of these professional mosaic artists do. I just do it my way. I'm not the best mosaic artist in the world, but I'm probably one of the happier mosaic artists because there's no rules. And one of my things or my expressions that I live by is there are no rules, only consequences. And that's the way I like to live and indulge my art. Without rules.
It's a great philosophy. Now, your home is literally a work of art. And so I want to ask you, what does home mean to you?
Well, home is the most important thing. Ironically, you hear the expression, home is where the heart is. Well, that's the most incredible truth available, I believe, to man and womankind. Home in the heart. It begins with the heartbeat. It begins with the essence of who we are. And I have always lived this way in sort of this adorned universe. Again, thank you to my mother, Marie Mclauchlin, for turning me on to that. She always encouraged me as a child to have beautiful things surrounding me to remind me, I guess. I don't know what her intention was, but she always encouraged me to adorn my surroundings. And she was a very sophisticated, intelligent woman. And somehow we were all in Oklahoma, which had everything going against us, but she kept instilling in me the idea and the philosophy of adornment, of making my environment pleasant and I guess more beautiful. I'm very grateful to her.
You've described your work as an exploration of the thread of irreverent placements and juxtapositions that map out the mysterious, chaotic marriage of the sacred and the profane. And you touched on this earlier, but can you expand on that?
I was fortunate to be in India in parts of the 70s and 80s with a teacher who was quite a character, and his philosophy and his viewpoint was rather controversial. However, it spoke to me, and that's all that's important. It doesn't have to. No one has to at all accept this man as being a demagogue or anything. It's just that I was lucky enough to be with somebody who pointed me in a direction where everything is sacred, and everything, in a sense, has a profanity to it at the same time. It could be one man's cup of tea and the other person's poison. And the irony is finding that juxtaposition, finding that fine line where those two can come together and meet, the sacred and the profane. Again, like the snake, the snake, one is a fearful object or being, and to another person, it's a sacred spirit animal. So I like to just place things together in such a way that provoke dialogue with the viewer and the piece that they're viewing. To me, it's all what I call installed poetry. I give people an example of juxtaposition And what their mind does with it is what's important. It has no longer in my hands. It's just, it belongs to them, belongs to the public. And that's, you know, it's universal.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. I attended a lecture at Harvard a couple years ago by a very well-known and well-respected Colombian artist. And in his talk, he said the whole point of art is to get people to think. And, you know, I may be kind of a bumpkin, but that had never really quite occurred to me. And I think it's a great definition. I mean, I think your work is beautiful, but I think the fact that, you know, it is evoking in different people, different responses that is kind of the point. Now, you had an opening this past weekend with two fellow artists who you've described as the Wabisabi Collective. And, you know, I love that, the concept behind Wabisabi, and I'm wondering if for listeners, if you can describe what that stands for and what it means to you.
Right. Well, the couple, they're a married couple, Shirley Marcantel and her husband, Greg Ellis, and they worked separately as artists, and they also worked together, and they called themselves the Wabisabi Collective. Wabisabi is a Japanese term that evokes the imperfect, the sense of patina, the sense of longevity in work that shows a almost a I don't want to say scarred nature, but there is a sense of having lived, and their work has that shows that process of imperfection. But within that imperfection, there is a perfect, beautiful patina of joy. To me, at least I look at it as joy. Others could look at it as style, but to me, it's about joy. It's about the joy of living, and about the lines that begin to show on our faces as we grow older. We are all walking examples of wabi-sabi.
Yes, well said. I agree.
Yes.
Now, my last question for you, Anado. Best Cultural Destinations tagline is "People are culture, connecting is the destination." And it seems to me that your work is also about connection. So in closing, could you share a message with listeners about what connection means to you and how to achieve it?
For me, when you're asking that question, I'm reminded of what I said earlier about home is where the heart is. Of course, it's not my statement. It's not an original statement, but I believe that what connectedness to me is when we as humanity, as the human culture, can come together and meet in that place, not about logic and knowing. The knowing has no logic or wordful definition. It's more about meeting in the heart. It's about sharing that life force that we all have and meeting in that special place. To me, when I've done something good, if you want to call it good in my expression, is if I find tears welling up in me. It just, the heart is just an amazing tool. It's such a teacher, and it's not about a dialogue of words. It's about a dialogue of feeling and knowing, and it's just the most important thing in the world to me.
I agree. Anado, is there anything else you'd like to share with listeners?
Oh, I'm very grateful that you chose to ask me to do this. If anything, I could say, and it's again a bit of a definition of my art, and that is allowing yourself to be a fool, to be full of a sense of wonder, to make mistakes. In mistakes, that's where we learn. We are on a voyage over a sea of mistakes, and in those mistakes, we are able to build something more glorious. We learn from our mistakes. So, if anything, be a fool unto thyself.
I love it. Listen, Anado, thank you so much. This is really a treat. You have so much wisdom, and It's been a joy to talk to you.
Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you again.
You will. Thank you,
All
Anado.
right.
Take
Okay,
care.
groove on. Adios.
Adios.
Bye.